Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program, live from Washington, D.C. We are uncovering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. As you know, the DFARS are the rulebooks for contracting with the Defense Department. We are moving sequentially. We started with DFARS Part 201 in January, and we'll be finishing with Part 253 in December. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 450 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take live questions, so if you have questions for our speaker, we will have his information on the last slide of the presentation today. And a special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. Virginia PTAC at GMU offers free one-on-one counseling to firms in Virginia on federal, state, and local procurement topics. Online resources and group trainings are free with no restriction on business location. If you are interested in learning more, please use the links provided to explore what PTAC can offer. Set Aside Alert provides up-to-date news, information, and opportunities for small business federal contractors. Their daily opportunities alerts assure you won't miss important sources sought and solicitation announcements, providing details so you can jump on the hot ones. Every 2 weeks, they deliver concise breaking news, events, regulations, and teaming opportunities. Please join the Reston Chamber of Commerce Government Contractors Council for regular meetings. Also, please stay tuned for more information on their very popular B2G conference in May. Please contact Alicia Fields with the email shown on the screen if you have any questions. Federal contracting is a relationship game. Now get in front of your federal humans sooner with the exclusive Players and Layers method from Judy Bratt in Summit Insight. Connect with her on LinkedIn and find out more or visit growfedbiz.com today. Join Washington Technology on February 19th as Air Force leaders share the technologies and priorities they are pursuing for the next year to 18 months and what that means for government contractors. Hear where the dollars are flowing and what companies are capturing those dollars. Don't miss out on this critical information. If you're interested in selling to the federal government, you may need a contract vehicle. The most popular one is the GSA schedule. Learn more about the requirements, the proposal process, and how this contract vehicle may or may not be the right tool for you. Jennifer Schaus is teaching a series of several classes, as you can see here with the Virginia PTAC and Mary Washington University. All classes are listed on our website under the events section with the registration link. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information can be found on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 23,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. Please join us for the winter session of Hot Topics on March 4th. We will cover CMMC, Mentor Protege, and more. I also wanted to inform you of a new series in 2021. We have launched a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month. and these will take place on the second Friday of each month this year at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen, and then take your live questions about that topic. So for example, January started off with our panelists covering CMMC, and this week, on February 12th, another panelist will cover OTAs. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available, and you can email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Also note that you can use code DFARS for a $15 discount. Okay, now to introduce our speaker, Mark Snyderman. Welcome, Mark. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Jen Schaus for putting these series on. I think they're really important, and hopefully we can relay some good information. Next slide, please. So we're going to be talking today about the DFARS Part 206, which is competition. Next slide. And just an overview of how the DFARS is set up. It's really a short section in the DFARS, and as most of you know, and if you've been following along the series, the DFARS are a supplement to the federal acquisition regulations. So you need to look at them in parallel to see how they work together. Unfortunately, I had done the FAR section, the actual same FAR section for this webinar series last year. So you could go back and watch that FAR section and watch this seminar together, and you'd have a real complete picture. And I'll try to summarize some of those pieces from the FAR section as well, so that you can see how it all interplays here. So we're going to look at exemptions from FAR Part 206. From FAR Part 6, we're going to look at full and open competition after exclusion of sources and other than full and open competition. Next slide. So really what we're looking at here is there's really 2 overarching theories on competition that sit within the FAR and the DFARS, and that's that competition promotes the public interest and competition yields value. So really what the entire acquisition system is built on is to try to move towards competition. So any movement away from competition, which would limit who can bid and who can go after work with the government, needs to have specific reasons in order to overcome the overarching theories that sit within the FAR. Next slide, please. So we need to go back and just to give you some overarching themes to understand how this all assembles and fits together. Let's look at the Competition and Contracting Act, which many of you probably know the term as CICA. CICA was from 1984, and it was passed to increase competitive nature within procurement, right? So we're trying to promote economy, efficiency, effectiveness. By the default provision is we want full and open competition to the maximum extent possible. Now, not all contracts are subject to CICA, but the FAR implements CICA, so therefore the DFARS is implementing CICA because the DFARS is just a supplement to the FAR. That's a whole lot of transitive property for noon on a Wednesday, but that's what you're getting. Next slide, please. So the best way to look at it is sort of, I try to give you a little diagram here of what's subject to CICA. So you're looking at, procurement contracts as a whole are subject to CICA, but not all procurement contracts are, because some are outside of it because they're set aside or sole source. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how the DFARS provides those options for defense companies to be bid and going after work that's set aside work for small business or set aside for socioeconomic reasons and other reasons as well. And then there's those contracts that are completely out of CICA totally, which are non-procurement type contracts, which are things like other transaction authority, which you may have heard just before that there's a special session on that later this week. And OTA has been a really growing area in contracting for the past 5 to 10 years, and it's definitely one where if you're not familiar with it, it's a good area to listen up and get trained up on. Next slide, please. So, post CICA, post 1984, the pendulum has really swung back and forth, and it's important to have a good understanding of, where, how is competition being used in the government? Is it, and where are we at in the pendulum? And so this was, this is sort of running all the way through 2019, and I can say that, there's some changes, that we all see coming from the new administration. So, we went to 1994, there was a whole lot less competition, a lot of and the movement towards IDIQs and simplified acquisition. And then they tried to reinvigorate competition through IDIQs in the 2008 NDAA. And in 2011, there was the famous memo from Sheh Assad, which, many of us have read, and talking about if there's only one bid, you go through a ton of cost and pricing reviews, and it really made it much more difficult to only have one bid. So they were trying to really drive up competition. And a lot of that took a hard swing backwards in 2019 NDAA when they looked to simplify acquisitions again, shorten timeframes. We moved a lot towards GSA, and it's limited, and some of the Oasis vehicles and STARS vehicles where competition is certainly limited compared to larger full and open competition. And it looks from the early writings and publications from the Biden administration, we should be probably swinging back towards more competition again. So we can see some limitations on maybe some limitation on the use of some of those GWAC vehicles and some of those efficiencies. But time will tell as we move forward how that's going to work out. Next slide. So like I said, we need to understand the interplay of the FAR in order to understand the DFARS. So the FAR is really set up under 3 levels of competition, which we've mentioned previously. FAR 6.1 is full and open competition, 6.2 full and open competition after exclusion of sources, and 6.3 is other than full and open competition. And so agencies, are pushed towards achieving competition to the maximum extent possible within each level of competition. Next slide. So now we'll move over to the DFARS, and 206.001 is the exemption from FAR Part 6. So what we're looking at are contracts issued under 237.104 are exempt. So what do we mean by exempt? What we mean is that there's, the competition standards aren't required, and you can move outside of full and open competition and use a different path towards issuing a contract. So what would that be? So for personal services of experts and consultants, which are authorized by a determination and findings, which you may have heard of a DNF, or personal services contracts for healthcare. So these are areas where the government is in need of specific experts or consultants, or there's personal service contracts for healthcare, and those personal service contracts are exempt from the competition requirements. And generally, when you have a DNF, it's going to authorize only one contract at a time, and you have to go back to FAR 1.7 to find what does a DNF actually look like. And I provide this not because, if you're not a contract official, you're not going to be writing the DNF, but it is really important as a contractor to understand what goes into these determinations, what is the requirements, that will actually push something to be exempt from competition, because obviously from the contracting side, anytime we can limit competition or even get out of competition completely for our services, certainly that's favorable. So when we look at what a DNF has in it, they need to prove out that the duties are temporary or intermittent in nature, that the acquisition of the services is advantageous to the national defense, that there's no Department of Defense personnel with the skills necessary to do that work, that the accepted appointment can't be obtained, and non-personal services contract isn't practicable at the time. So these are all points that the contracting officer will have to prove out in order to have that DNF issued to obtain those personal services under the exemption. Next slide. So in addition, there's a specific call out for an exemption from FAR Part 6 of follow-on production contracts for products which were developed pursuant to OTA authority. So we just mentioned that, this other transaction authority is growing, and, what is OTA authority? Essentially, it is the ability, the goal of OTA is really to grab hold of non-traditional defense contractors and solutions and products and bring them to the government in a way that is outside the FAR, outside the federal acquisition regulations, to make it easier to contract with these companies and bring them into the fold and obtain solutions that the government might not have otherwise been able to obtain. So what happens if, and the OTA is typically for prototyping. So if they're going ahead and buying and spending money to get a prototype on hand, what happens when they want to get a follow-on production contract? Should that follow-on production contract be, competed under the FAR, or should it be exempted out? And if you follow the logic of that, and when we think back to that chart that I showed a few slides ago, it would be exempted out. So in order to be exempted out, the OTA must include a provision that there would be a follow-on production contract. So that's important from the contractor side to understand that, they want to make sure that in your OTA agreements, it's talking about the potential for follow-on production, so that, you don't get, you don't have a loophole, a little hole there in your contract that wouldn't allow you to get this exemption. The contracting officer receives sufficient information from the agreements officer as well as the project manager for prototyping documents in compliance with 32 CFR section 3.9. And generally what that section says is that when a non-federal party to the OTA has invested at least 1/3 of the cost of the prototype, the production contract can be sole sourced. Now, and that doesn't mean that they actually spent actual dollars. It could have been in-kind contribution to get to that 1/3 of the cost of the prototype as part of their OTA contract originally. So when a contractor is working under OTA and they do the prototype work, they could then likely get a follow-on production contract that doesn't have to be competed. So that's a very powerful tool if you're in the production environment and you're a prototyping company and you're doing work under OTAs. The last point is that, the contracting officer will establish quantities and prices for the follow-on production contract, but they can't exceed those that are in the OTA itself. So again, it's important to make sure that your OTA, if you're looking at prototype work that might drive towards production, which obviously anytime we're doing prototyping, we're hoping it's going to drive there, that we're actually getting those exemptions and those things built in from the beginning to make sure that we can take advantage of this exemption. Next slide, please. So you also have to look at establishing or maintaining alternative sources, which is 206.202 in the DFARS. Agencies can totally or partially exclude a particular source from any contract action. And the DNF, the determination of findings, must identify the source to be excluded and other pertinent information supporting that. So I gave you sort of the language from the sample DNF that's in the DFARS. So you could see, what is it that the agency would have to do in order to show that particular sources should be excluded and, try to limit competition for a particular acquisition. So there's 3 alternatives that are provided. One, it will increase or maintain competition for this requirement and is expected to result in the reduction of overall costs, and they have to identify that actual cost for the present and future acquisition of these supplies. Alternate 2, it's in the interest of the national defense because it will result in having a supplier that's available for furnishing the supplies or services in case of a national emergency or industrial mobilization. Or 3, it's in the interest of national defense because it will result in establishment or maintenance of an essential engineering research or development capability to be provided by an educational or other nonprofit institution or a FFRDC, a federally funded research and development center. So essentially, when the government has specific needs on the Department of Defense side that fall within national emergencies, industrial mobilizations, they see that it could be great cause for reduction of costs for overall supplies, or it's work that's being done through one of the research facilities, then they can issue essentially an exemption from competition to exclude everyone else and go straight to those companies or those entities. Next slide. So then, we also talked about earlier that the FAR has, sort of 3 different sections in terms of competition, and one is, other than full and open competition. So in the DoD world and DFARS, we look at 206.3, where they can use other than full and open to seek where only one responsible source and no other supplies or services could satisfy that requirement. So there are instances where there is no one else that makes a specific component or supply or service that the government is currently using that no one else can do. So they need that, and instead of trying to go through competition and spending lots of resources and time to obtain a product or a service, the Defense Department can seek to sole source that item under 206.3. Specifically 206.302-1. In order to do that, they need to have a tech evaluation that shows that only one source is fully qualified, that the proposal is offering some significant scientific or technological promise and is original thinking, and also that it's going to benefit the national defense. Or they could have a civilian DoD appointee determine that the word is in the national defense interest, so a political appointee that was approved by the Senate. That level of DoD level is required, or that the contract is related to improvement of equipment in development or in production. Next, I could also look at unusual and compelling urgency, such as fire, flood, or other disaster, or it's mission critical to performance, right? So if there's a mass, so think about some of the natural disasters that have occurred. Hurricane Katrina, any number of those awful disasters, and the DoD has authority under 206.302-2 to sole source services and acquisition of supplies in order to deal with those emergent situations and not have to go through competition. Next slide. We also look at some additional, places where the DoD can seek to use sole source capability, and that's for industrial mobilization, engineering development, or research capabilities. So, capabilities that are specific to the military industrial complex, mobilizing supplies, things along those nature. Maybe perhaps there's a chemical or a compound that is, really hard to find, or rare earth metals, things along that line where there's not significant supplies and they need to ensure that the supply will be available, for the DoD going forward. They could use sole source capability to go after and acquire those goods. By international agreement, so the country U.S. could make an agreement with a friendly country for acquisition of certain services or goods and supplies, and those would be not subject to competition requirements. They could be authorized or required by statute under, the exemption of 206.302-5, which is, for military exchange store purchases outside the U.S., basically for supplying the stores on base. We're acquiring fire protection, airfield operations, or community services from local governments at military installations. So when a military installation needs support at its locally and internationally, they can do that without seeking using competition rules. Or lastly, just simply in the public interest. However, in order to use that exemption level from competition, you need SecDef authorizations. The Secretary of Defense has to sign off on that directly or through an undersecretary. So that's pretty high level requirements. and would be reserved for something usually in exigent circumstances. Next slide, please. So the justifications under 206-303 are, have just changed recently under NDA 2020. So under the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act, there was a change made for justifications and approvals for 8A contracting. It used to be a lower level for requirements for when a JNA would be needed, and they increased that requirement for 8A contracts to be issued up to $100 million without NDA 20 without JNA approval, and for over 100 million or a non-8A, you would have to provide a justification and approval showing that there was a sources sought or an RFI was properly posted and obtain proper approval of JNA through defense channels up through the Pentagon. So this is a pretty significant change in the rules that that definitely are affecting how much work could go 8A, and they fit in well with a lot of the changes we've all seen and have been discussed on these webinars on the joint venture rules and what can be done under joint venture and what can't, and the advantages to looking at those mentor protege and those JV relationships. So I do suggest you definitely take a look at some other webinars on those topics and train up on them, because it's definitely a movement with a $100 million ceiling before it needs JNA approval. It's an area where we'll likely see significant movement, and add that to the Biden administration recent announcements during their campaign of desire to increase the amount of work being set aside for minority companies. Next slide. So that would be all there is here. It's not a very long topic to discuss through, but it is definitely important that you understand the pieces of competition and how they fit together, and how you can try to leverage the system to limit competition wherever possible, to be able to go after work. And good luck to all of you as you apply these. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me. My email is here, mark@snydermanlawgroup.com, or you could give me a shout at 646-242-3862. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us next week as we cover more of the DFARS parts.